Welcome to English Country Life. At 5 p.m. on the 3rd of November in Great Britain, an Avian Influenza Prevention Zone came into effect. There are a number of things which we need to do to be legally compliant with this Avian Influenza Prevention Zone, but actually they're very straightforward. So today I'm going to take you through them one by one. Welcome, my name's Fiona. The Avian Influenza Prevention Zone, which was introduced into Great Britain, so Scotland, England and Wales, at 5 p.m. on the 3rd of November, is designed to protect our poultry. Now the great news is that we can still free range our poultry, providing we adhere to a number of legal requirements. And this is what I'm going to take you through today, because they can look a little bit overwhelming, but they're really simple. And I'm sure you'll find that once I take you through them, they're going to be very, very easy to comply with. Now, there are a couple of caveats to this, and the first is if you've got more than 500 combined chickens, ducks or geese, there are bigger requirements for you. There are enhanced requirements. So I've put a link to the document in the description down below, so please do check that out so you understand what those requirements are. But if you've got up to 499 birds, this video covers everything that you need to know. The second caveat is that time moves on, and I'll put an update in the description down below, so please check it to make sure that what I'm telling you today is still valid. It's possible that what we're being asked to do has been lifted. It's also possible that we've got enhanced requirements like keeping our chickens undercover. But at this stage we can free range, so that's wonderful. And it does apply to every poultry keeper. So if you've got a pet chicken, it still applies to you. But let me take you through it because it's really easy. Let's start with number one. Requirement 1 asks us to cleanse and disinfect equipment, vehicles and footwear when moving between premises where poultry is kept. And that sounds much more complicated than it actually is. This is what we've done. We've set up some simple foot scrub stations, and this is one of them. It's just a large deep gravel tray that's normally used for plants with a piece of astroturf in the bottom. We fill it with a disinfectant solution, and then we use long handled deck brushes to scrub our boots. We've chosen to have them on our driveway for any visitors who come and see us who have poultry of their own, and then again at the entry and exit points to the chicken field. Although if you do have more than 50 birds, these stations are compulsory at entry and exit points. You'll have noticed before Hugh started to scrub his boots that he moved a board away from the top of the gravel tray, and that's to avoid any debris like leaves being blown into the water. So when the foot scrub is not in use, it's properly protected. DEFRA has a list of approved disinfectants, of which we've got 2, and these are GEESE Fluid and Virkon S tablets. A link to the full approved list is in the description down below. We've filled a 5-litre sprayer with the same disinfectant solution, and vehicles that do pass our gates are sprayed. Normally we are spraying wheels as people visit us in cars which are not accessing their poultry areas, but there's still a risk of contamination from the wheels picking things up from the ground. Essentially we're playing it safe. If you do move between flocks or premises using an agricultural vehicle such as a quad bike, these vehicles will need to be sprayed more fully, as the poultry might approach the vehicle, and that will apply also to any equipment that moves between sites. Item number 2 is where most poultry keepers are going to have to make adjustments. If you've got open feeders or drinkers, they all need to be undercover. What it actually says is feed, water and bedding are stored undercover, and steps are taken to prevent access by wild birds to minimise the risk of virus contamination. Now that's not just your long-term storage, that's your storage of food to feed your poultry. So if you've got on-demand feeders like open feeders, they will have to go in an old coop, in a shelter, just anything with a roof on top, so any wild birds flying over don't think, oh, quick easy meal there. And we've got these grandpa's feeders, and they're treadle feeders, and they do comply. As you can see, there's no access in the closed state to food by either the chickens or wild birds or anything that happens to be flying past. It does take an adult chicken to open them. They stand on the treadle and you can see it makes a noise, and when the lid comes down it also makes a noise. So it takes about a week to train a chicken to get used to this. So any ducks or geese flying past who want a quick meal, they're not going to use this because they're going to be terrified of that noise. So our ground house feeders as treadle feeders do comply. There is one big downside for our chickens, and that's that I'm going to have to remove our omelette pecking toys. Now, as you can see, it's empty, so it's not really a problem as it stands, but I may as well put them away. We free range our birds. Now, these great omelette toys mean that the chickens peck at them, and whatever you put inside, we generally use wheat grains, will fall to the ground, and that's where the problem lies, because food isn't undercover. If you keep your chickens in an enclosed run with their coop inside that and have these toys, you can continue to use them. But because we're free ranging, all of these toys, unfortunately, which dispense food, have to be removed. One thing to be aware of is that if you dispense treats to your chickens normally by hand feeding them in the open, that under the new requirements you won't be able to do that. I'm sitting here because this is where I normally have whole grain in my hand and give it to the chickens, and as you can see, this young man is very disappointed. I'm just holding out my hand and there's nothing in it. I'm going to have to find a different way of dispensing treats. Now, if you do have a covered run, as I've said with the omelette pecking toys, you can dispense treats in there because it is undercover. But for us, because we don't have a covered runs and it is a free range area, I'm going to have to open up one of the old coops and probably put an omelette pecker in there. And I've now got a young hen pecking at my fingers because she thinks I'm hiding whole wheat. I'm sorry, darling. The long-term storage of food for your poultry is also important under this item. We keep ours in dustbins next to the chicken field, and we've got the lids weighted down by bricks. Wild birds of any size cannot access it. It would take a lot of effort to get inside these bins. So that's a very simple arrangement. Another part of this requirement is that poultry drinkers must be kept under cover. If you have a covered run for your chickens, you won't need to make adjustments. However, if you have drinkers in a free range area, just as we do, they will have to be moved under cover. Our simple solution to this was to pop a cover over 2/3 of one of our shelters. We put the drinker inside so it's hidden away. It's a low-cost way of meeting the requirement, but any shelter arrangement where the drinker inside can't easily be seen by passing wild birds will meet the requirement. Bedding is the final part of the requirement. No matter what type of bedding you use, move it into an area which wild birds can't access. We use compressed bales of wood shavings and we store them in one of our barns, but it could just as easily be a garage, a greenhouse or a garden shed. Item 3 on the list I can't actually demonstrate to you because it requires that ducks and geese should not be kept in the same pen or building as other poultry species. We only have chickens, we don't have ducks, we don't have geese. But if you do have all three species and you keep them together, you will need to find an alternative housing for the ducks, for the geese, and you will need to put some kind of fencing or barrier up in your free range area. Now that could be as simple as boards propped up against bricks or breeze blocks, or it could be some very cheap plastic fencing or even poultry mesh. All three will do the job as long as there is a physical barrier between your ducks, your geese and your chickens. Item number 4 is not one which is a problem for most people, and what it says is there's no direct contact with poultry or other captured birds on other neighbouring premises. So if you do happen to have your chickens, ducks and geese, they can wander into another property where ducks, chickens or geese are kept, or they can wander into your property. You just need to look at putting up a physical barrier between the two areas so the two don't come into contact. It's really quite a simple one to comply with. Number 5 is really easy to comply with. It says effective vermin control is carried out in any part of the premises where poultry or other captive birds are kept. Now I'm holding this black box, and this is actually a poison block bait station for the control of rats and other rodents. I'm stood outside of the chicken area, outside the electric fence, because we don't have any evidence of rodents at the moment. And this is something to be aware of. Even though we're talking about effective vermin control is carried out, there's overriding legislation in the UK which means that actually bait station boxes like this can't be put out unless evidence of rodents are actually seen. I would recommend though, to comply with number 5, that you buy some of these and have them in stock ready to go just in case any evidence of rodents are actually seen. Item number 6 on the list is really easy for us to comply with here. What it's all about is restricting the movement of people and vehicles or equipment to parts of the property where poultry are kept, and that actually only people who are looking after the welfare of your animals, collecting eggs, or for official visits like inspections have access to your poultry. And it's so easy for us because all we've done is we've locked our gates. That means anyone coming here has to either book an appointment so we know they're coming, or they have to ring the doorbell which is on the gate so they can gain access to the property. And once that happens, we know exactly where they go and we can control their movements. We're lucky in that our poultry are already kept the other side of our home, so the driveway is completely separate. Now if your ducks, chickens, geese normally roam around where your driveway is, where vehicles and people access, please think about putting a fence up. Well, actually legally you will have to put some kind of barrier up to stop your poultry coming into that area. But do think about how you're going to control that access to comply with the legal requirements. 7 and 8 are easy to comply with too. They're about record keeping. Where 6 restricts people, vehicles and equipment to the site where poultry are kept, 7 and 8 is about keeping records of those people. So if anyone does come in and see your poultry, your chickens, your ducks and your geese, make a note of their registration number and who they are. If you sell any poultry, and please check those exclusion zones to make sure you're not in one of those, in which case you won't be able to sell poultry. So if you can sell poultry, you'll need to make a note of the registration number of the people who came to collect them, if they're collecting a vehicle, and you'll need to make a note of their name and addresses too. But that's just good practice. If you're selling eggs and know who you're selling them to, great, make a note of their names and addresses too. But if they're not accessing your property and you've got an honesty box and a site outside your garden gate, just make a note of the number of eggs that you've sold and on what date. Number 9 is really easy to comply with because it's your basic coop maintenance, and it's about making sure that the buildings are watertight. And it says buildings that house the birds are maintained, and any defects that allow water ingress or other contamination to enter the building are rectified without undue delay. Now for me this is really easy to comply with because every morning I come in and take out any feces which the chickens have let rip the night before, so that the coop is always clean. But it gives me the opportunity to check and see if any water has got in, if it's been raining. If it has, I will fix it the same day. So I'm doing this on a daily basis. Now if you don't have that routine of poo picking to take it out on a daily basis, just go in and still have a look. So whenever you go in and have a look at the chickens, just open the hatches, open the doors, open the roof, have a look inside and make sure it is watertight. And if you're seeing any evidence that water's getting in, take corrective measures on the same day. Number 10 is a big one. It looks quite overwhelming to begin with because it's got 10 subsections, but it's really easy. It's directed to free-range chicken keepers. And let me just take you through, because some of the items actually repeat things we've already discussed. And the first thing it asks us to do is to fence in our free-range poultry. So we've got electric fencing. We've already discussed the types of fencing you could have. Even your garden fencing is enough, but I'm not going to go over that again. We look at standing water as well in there, and what it's asking us to do is to discourage any wild birds from coming down. So that might be netting over ponds, it might be fencing over ponds or streams, it might be fencing off any standing water from heavy rain. But actually that's really easy again. So just have a look at the watercourses that you've got and do everything you can to discourage the wildfowl from coming into those areas. The next one you may or may not have actually come across. It's about carcasses of wild birds, and depending on how big your area is, you may or may not find dead birds in your area. If you do, it won't be very often, but it's about getting them out of your poultry area as quickly as possible and then disposing of them appropriately. It also talks about food and water being undercover, and we've covered that already, so again, it's not a big deal. We've already talked about how you can actually do that, so as long as you're complying with what we've previously discussed, you're compliant with item 10. We've got some of our coops on hard stands. Now it does talk about slabs, it talks about tarmac, it talks about concrete. So if you have any of that in your poultry area, those need to be scrubbed down with some disinfectant on a regular basis. We use GEESE fluid, diluted to the right amount, and then we will scrub those slabs just to make sure that any contamination is removed. It then goes on to talk about contamination a little bit more. So the next two items, it talks about removing any feces, removing any feathers, removing anything which may or may not be from your poultry. So it could be from wild birds as well. So if you see feathers, pick them up and get rid of them. If you see feces on the ground, pick them up and get rid of those. I use a child's garden rake to hook underneath the feces and pop it in a bucket to get rid of it. That's the most appropriate way for us. And the other part of that is about if you're going to put any new buildings in your poultry area, so most likely new coops, just have an inspection of the area that it's actually going to sit on before you actually put the building on there. So again, you're trying to remove any feathers, you're trying to remove any feces, just to make sure that that area is entirely clear. And then the next three is about discouraging wild birds, particularly wildfowl, into your property at all. Now, it talks about standing water, it talks about it talks about the poultry area itself, and it talks about taking proactive measures all the way down the line. So we use shredded feed sacks, and we tie them very, very high up in the trees, because you've got a balance here between scaring your own poultry and scaring the wild birds away. High up in the trees, our poultry don't care. They're not really interested in what's going on that high up, but it's enough to discourage any wild birds flying over. It may be more appropriate for you to put streamers, or there's flying hawks you can get on poles, which are like kites that are in the shape of a hawk and move about in the wind. If the corners of your property are sufficiently far enough away from your poultry area that it's not going to scare your chickens, but it's going to be enough to stop wild birds flying over and think, oh, that's a great place to be, that's a good way to meet the requirements. What you also ought to consider is if you have wild bird feeders on your property, please consider removing them. In fact, to comply with the requirements here, all wild bird feeders really ought to be removed, and I know a lot of people aren't going to want to do that. We've taken all of ours away. We're not very happy about it. We'd like to feed the sparrows and the blackbirds. However, if wild bird seed hits the floor, we have had wildfowl come into the property, so we've just removed it all and removed that risk from our area. And then finally, what it asks you to do is regularly keep up to date with all of those requirements and carry on just risk assessing and making sure that you're fully compliant. So if you are seeing wildfowl in your area and you've got some of these measures in place, clearly they're not quite enough to keep the wildfowl out, so it's constantly reassessing and just making sure that you're doing everything you can to prevent wildfowl coming in. And that's it. That's everything that we need to do to comply with this Avian Influenza Prevention Zone requirements. And I've got a dragonfly coming down to join me now and again on the paper, which is amazing. If you have liked this content, take a moment and give me a thumbs up below. Don't forget to check the description down below to make sure that this guidance is still valid and it hasn't been updated either to lift the restrictions or to require us to keep our chickens under cover, because it can change, so please do check that description. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, hit subscribe and the bell icon and you'll get to know of every new video as soon as it goes live. If you've got a question for me, leave it in the comment section and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. But for now, thanks for watching and I look forward to seeing you next time.